Bledsoe was arrested.
Patrick Montgomery was in court.
Jonathan Manapa will stay in federal custody.
No, I don't take responsibility at all.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. So before I jump into this January 6th sentencing, I want to say up front, for anyone who isn't aware, I had this particular January 6th participant on my show. I consider him to be somewhat of a friend. We remained in contact for a while. I haven't heard from him in probably more than a year now, though. And I know for a fact he is not a Trump supporter, as you're going to hear. He loathes Trump. So here's the deal. Here are the details of his story. 29-year-old Utah resident John Sullivan participated in BLM protests in 2020. Some of the leaders of those protests became increasingly annoyed with him because they felt that he was either trying to gain notoriety more than anything, or he was possibly working against the movement because of some of the things that he did and kind of screwed up on. The prosecutor shared that during this period of time, Sullivan, quote, posted videos and photos referencing engagement in riots. He also posted instructions for how to make Molotov cocktails, how to take down a monument, and how to dress and what to bring to a protest, including a ballistic vest and weapons for protection. So in the video, this one that they're referencing, he showed a knife, which he ended up taking to the Capitol with him on January 6th. So by the winter of 2020, they say that Sullivan advocated for a, quote, dismantling of the government. And he wrote on Instagram, quote, we will have live updates on the location for tonight's purge. Spread the message, let the electoral purge commence. In another post, he wrote, quote, riots are meant to bring change, so purge the world with fire. And, quote, an armed revolution is the only way to bring about change effectively. On January 1st of 2021, he posted on Twitter, and Sullivan was asking people to go and counter-protest at the Capitol on January 6th. He wrote in part, quote, we need numbers to show up. No fascist in D.C. March against fascists. Now, the prosecutor said that evidence, that specific tweet, was not admitted in the trial. Then on January 2nd of 2021, Sullivan shared a photo of himself. He was burning an American flag and he captioned it, quote, fuck the system, time to burn it all down. Sullivan also shared a video explaining the electoral process, the certification process prior to January 6th. And on January 6th, he went to D.C. He went with a woman named Jade Sacker. She has not been arrested or charged in any way, but she, at that time, was making a documentary about Sullivan and his anti-government policies and his activities. She also said that she was going to document his fallout with his brother, who is a MAGA supporter. So, you know, there was like that dichotomy in the story about two brothers who were raised by the same parents, but they had completely oppositional or opposing political views. So anyway, on the way to the Capitol, Sullivan was heard saying, quote, they broke inside. Hell yeah, I'm going up. And quote, I'm going all the way to the top. So Sullivan was wearing a tactical vest. He had ballistic plates inside of it. He was carrying a gas mask. He also had a megaphone with him. And as they entered the restricted ground, Sullivan said, quote, we're taking this shit to the ground, and quote, let's fuck shit up. And he used his megaphone to try to get chants started. And he was shouting things like, quote, we about to burn this shit down. And then Sullivan joined with a group that was at the front of the police line, and he was yelling through the megaphone at the police, quote, you guys work for us. Fuck you. If we don't get it, we're burning this shit down. And quote, who do you protect? Who do you serve? So as the mob forced the police up the scaffolding and back toward the building, Sullivan was yelling, you know, yeah, let's go, get in that shit. He followed the mob. He said it was a, quote, motherfucking revolution. And then he yelled to other people that they were taking the Capitol. When officers were overwhelmed, they finally fled the Upper West Terrace, and they said that Sullivan was seen on video. He kicked over a barricade so that he and others could advance forward. And then he was celebrating all the chaos below. He called it beautiful. He was helping other people in the mob climb up over the railing. And he was yelling to people below, you know, let's go. And so Sacker was recording all of this, and Sullivan was recording some of his own video. And he told Sacker that he was going to continue to film as a, quote, good ploy so I don't get arrested. So not good. Then they made their way to the Capitol. Sullivan was seen on surveillance video entering the building. He climbed in through a broken window. And after he entered, Sullivan was heard telling people, quote, we got to get this shit burnt. So an officer ordered Sullivan to leave. He argued with the officer for a while. They say he used his body weight to resist the officer. And then when the officer became distracted by somebody else or something else going on, Sullivan made his way further into the building. Another officer tried to get him and others to turn around. He ignored that officer. And then eventually, you know, the crowd that Sullivan was in, they overwhelmed and pushed past that group of officers. So Sullivan was then seen entering a Senate office, and he was banging on the window to get everyone's attention outside. And he was shouting to them, you know, we did this shit, we took this shit. And as he was hitting the window, the glass shattered. So Sullivan kind of laughed and joked about it, and he said, quote, no one got that on camera. So from the office, he headed towards the House chamber. They ran into another small group of officers outside of the doors. And when other people in the mob were calling for peace and violence, Sullivan said things to them like, it's too late for that, fuck that shit. So they pushed past the police. They made it to one of the chamber doorways, and Sullivan offered up his knife because the mob was trying to break the windows on the doors. Now, this was the doorway that you guys have seen, I'm sure, in videos and photos where the officers were pointing their guns through the broken glass. And Sullivan was yelling, you know, let's go, let's go. He said, quote, pull that motherfucker out, this bitch. I'm assuming he was talking about one of the police officers. So after they failed to gain entry at that location, Sullivan then joined the mob. He followed them over to the other set of house doors outside of the speaker's lobby. So that is where he ultimately recorded the shooting of Ashley Babbitt. Before that happened, though, Sullivan offered up his knife again. Because again, as I'm sure you guys have all seen, even in his videos, people were punching the doors, they were hitting the glass with various objects. So Sullivan tried to convince the police to leave. He was heard on video saying, you know, we don't want to hurt you, you guys should just take off. As we all saw in the video, the officers did move away from the door because there were other officers who arrived, and those officers that had just arrived were actually wearing riot gear. So they were much better prepared to fend off this increasingly agitated crowd. So as the officers who didn't have on the riot gear stepped away, Sullivan started yelling, quote, go, go, let's go, get that shit. Well, then, you know, that's when we all witnessed someone broke a window open. That is when Ashley Babbitt attempted to climb through, and when she was told not to, she was shot. Ultimately, she died of her injuries because she failed to obey the officer's orders. Isn't that what the right always says? So Sullivan again ignored officers. They were telling him to leave. He continued to film Babbitt. So he was finally pushed away, but they said he hung around even after he backed off, and he was giving people his social media handles. He was criticizing the police about the shooting. So he finally left the building to about 12 minutes after the shooting by force. And as Sullivan was leaving the Capitol grounds, he was captured on video. He was on a phone call with a friend, and he said to the friend, quote, I brought my megaphone to instigate that shit. And then Sullivan told the documentarian that he sided, quote, with anyone willing to rip this down and put something new in place, put something better in place. And then he later told her, quote, I probably just understood where to incite violence. And the prosecutor said, following the Capitol attack, Sullivan changed the word activist on his website to journalist because they believed that he was trying to fabricate the story about being a journalist and only being there to document what was going on. So the FBI also said Sullivan was on their radar even prior to the Capitol attack. So they located him pretty quickly and they made contact with him. And he provided the FBI with 11 videos that he took on January 6th, but he apparently lied to them. He said he didn't have his knife with him at the Capitol. And when they executed a search warrant and they got his devices, they found he hadn't turned over all of his January 6th footage. So the video excluded a part where he was berating the police officers for shooting Babbitt. And then the prosecutor also said Sullivan's internet search history showed that he tried to find and create a fake press pass. So Sullivan was arrested on January 14th of 2021, and in a superseding indictment, he was charged with obstructing an official proceeding, civil disorder, entering a restricted building or grounds with a deadly or dangerous weapon, 2 counts of disorderly conduct, one of which also included that deadly or dangerous weapon enhancement, possession of a deadly or dangerous weapon on Capitol grounds, and parading or demonstrating in a Capitol building. So Sullivan refused a plea deal. I can tell you from my conversations with him, he honestly believed he was going to be found innocent because he did claim to be a journalist. But the evidence shown at the trial proved otherwise. And so Sullivan was also caught making some false statements. And in November of 2023, the jury found Sullivan guilty on all counts. So based on just the obstruction charge, Sullivan faced up to 20 years in prison, 3 years of probation, and $250,000 in fines. The government, though, requested a sentence of 87 months in prison, 3 years of probation, $2,000 in restitution, and they asked for a fine of $90,875, which was the amount of money that he made selling his January 6 footage. So as for Sullivan's criminal history, he was arrested after he hosted a BLM protest where a driver of a vehicle was shot by a protester. Sullivan's case was ultimately dismissed, but apparently initially he refused to say who it was that shot the person. And so they arrested him, but that was let go. And then the prosecutor said Sullivan was on the FBI's radar before January 6th because they believe that he was involved in vandalizing a federal building in California. He was never charged, he was never arrested for that, but that was their suspicion. So U.S. District Judge Royce Lamberth presided over Sullivan's case, and he referred to Sullivan as a, quote, chaos agent. And he said he believed that for Sullivan, quote, violence was an end unto itself. So Sullivan apologized to the court for his behavior at the sentencing hearing. But in the end, Judge Lamberth sentenced Sullivan to 6 years in prison, 2 years of probation, and $2,000 in restitution. And Sullivan has been in jail since he was found guilty, so he's going to get a little bit of credit for time served. Also, the judge said he was going to recommend that Sullivan be transferred to a low security facility in Utah because he's been held essentially in solitary confinement since his trial. And it's being done for his own safety because obviously his political views differ very much from other January 6 inmates. They probably see him as Antifa. So, they're trying to keep him safe. But here's the thing. Unequivocally, John Sullivan screwed up. He made mistakes that day. He did things he should not have done. He said things he shouldn't have done. What he did on January 6th was absolutely wrong. Having said that, 6 years is extreme for someone who did not lay a finger on an officer. As you guys know, I have covered every single sentence with very few exceptions, just, people I haven't gotten to yet, but there's very few. And I have never seen a sentence this long when the person was not violent, when they were not extremely violent. I have seen even people who were slightly violent, who sprayed police with pepper spray, who were totally out of control, and they got less time behind bars, maybe 2 or 3 years in prison. So in my opinion, and this is not just because I have talked with John, not just because I think that he is a decent person who screwed up, but in my opinion, based on every case that I have reviewed, this is wildly heavy-handed compared to other January 6 cases. I don't know what's going on. And to prove my point, Judge Lamberth just sentenced someone that I shared the case with you guys who was violent, was extremely violent, and got less time. So I don't know what the deal was. I wish John had taken a plea deal, but it was not my, place to tell him to take a plea deal, especially since I am reporting on these cases. I think it's a conflict of interest. So we'll see what happens with his appeal. I think that of all the cases that I've seen, he probably has the best case to make for an appeal if you look at the other cases that even Judge Lamberth has sentenced. So we'll see. I'll keep you posted. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please donate if you can. Love you all. Take care. Talk with you soon.